The terminal at JFK Airport buzzed with the usual chaos of travelers rushing to catch their flights. Suitcases rolled across the tiled floor, announcements echoed through the speakers, and people from all walks of life hurried past one another. Amidst this whirlwind of activity stood Dr. Evelyn Carter, a striking figure whose presence commanded attention even in the crowded space. Dressed in a tailored navy blazer, her hair neatly styled and her posture radiating confidence, she looked every bit like the accomplished professional she was. Evelyn had spent the last week attending an international conference on aerospace engineering in Europe, a prestigious event where she had delivered a keynote speech on cutting-edge defense technologies. Her work as both a decorated U.S. Army veteran and a leading aerospace engineer had earned her recognition far beyond American borders. Yet, despite her credentials and years of experience navigating airports worldwide, there was something about today's atmosphere that made her uneasy. As she approached the security checkpoint, Evelyn noticed a group of TSA officers standing nearby. They weren't doing anything unusual, just chatting casually among themselves, but something about the way they glanced in her direction gave her pause. It wasn't the first time Evelyn had felt eyes on her in public spaces, but usually, it passed quickly. This time, however, the feeling lingered, gnawing at the edges of her mind. She tried to shake it off, reminding herself that paranoia could stem from fatigue after a long journey. Pushing her rolling carry-on ahead of her, she joined the queue for the security scanners. The line moved slowly, giving her plenty of time to observe those around her, families with children, business people glued to their phones, tourists snapping photos. It was a diverse mix of humanity, each person absorbed in their own world. When it was finally Evelyn's turn, she stepped up to the conveyor belt and began unloading her belongings. She placed her laptop, passport, wallet, and a small pouch of toiletries into the gray plastic bins provided. As she slid her carry-on bag onto the X-ray machine's belt, she couldn't help but notice how one of the TSA officers watched her intently. His gaze wasn't just casual. It seemed deliberate, almost scrutinizing. "Ma'am, can you step over here, please?" the officer said, gesturing toward a separate area designated for additional screening. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, surprised by the request. She hadn't been flagged for extra checks during any of her previous travels, not once. Still, she nodded politely and followed his instructions, telling herself it was probably standard procedure. Standing aside, Evelyn waited while her items disappeared into the scanner. From the corner of her eye, she saw the officer speaking, quietly to a colleague. Their body language suggested they were discussing something serious, though she couldn't hear what they were saying. A knot formed in her stomach as she realized more officers were now gathering around her station. One of them approached her with a clipboard, asking routine questions. "Where are you traveling from? What is the purpose of your visit? Do you have any items in your luggage that require special declaration?" Evelyn answered calmly, explaining her recent trip and providing details about her work. But instead of easing the tension, her responses seemed to make the situation worse. Another officer chimed in, his tone sharper than before. "Can you explain what these wires are for?" he asked, pointing to the screen displaying the contents of her carry-on. Evelyn blinked, momentarily confused. Then it dawned on her. He must be referring to the prototype components she always carried with her. These were tools essential to her job, harmless pieces of equipment designed for testing new technology. "It's part of my work," Evelyn replied patiently. "I'm an aerospace engineer. I carry these materials for research purposes." She reached into her pocket to pull out her identification badge, which clearly stated her name, rank, and affiliation with the Department of Defense. Before she could hand it over, though, the officer cut her off. "We'll need to take a closer look," he said firmly, ignoring her explanation. By now, several other passengers had stopped to watch the unfolding scene. Some whispered to each other, while others simply stared, unsure of what to make of the situation. Evelyn felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her, but she forced herself to remain composed. The officers instructed her to move to a secluded corner of the terminal, away from prying eyes. There, they proceeded to search her belongings meticulously, emptying every pocket of her bag and examining each item individually. Evelyn stood silently, her arms crossed, trying to maintain her dignity despite the growing frustration bubbling inside her. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The initial discomfort of being singled out morphed into outright indignation as the officers continued their invasive inspection. Every question they asked seemed designed to cast doubt on her intentions, as if her mere existence as a black woman traveling alone warranted suspicion. Evelyn wanted to protest, to demand answers, but she knew better than to escalate the confrontation further. Instead, she focused on controlling her breathing, repeating a mantra in her head. "Stay calm. You've done nothing wrong." It was a lesson she had learned early in her military career, one that had served her well in countless challenging situations. But this time, it felt different. This wasn't combat or a high-stakes mission. It was supposed to be a simple return home. And yet here she was, reduced to defending her identity in front of strangers who seemed determined to find fault where none existed. By the time the search concluded, Evelyn's patience was wearing thin. Though no contraband or suspicious items were found, the officers showed no sign of letting her go. Instead, they informed her that she would need to accompany them to a holding room for further questioning. Shock rippled through her as she processed their words. How had things escalated so quickly? Why were they treating her like a threat? As she walked alongside the officers, flanked by curious onlookers, Evelyn vowed not to let this moment define her. Whatever happened next, she would fight back, not with anger or aggression, but with the same resilience and determination that had carried her through every challenge in her life. Little did she know, the battle was only beginning, and its impact would resonate far beyond the confines of the airport terminal. As Evelyn stood in the holding room at JFK Airport, her mind raced with questions. How had a routine trip turned into this? She glanced around the small, sterile space, a stark contrast to the bustling terminal she'd been in just moments ago. The walls were bare except for a clock that ticked loudly, each second stretching out like an eternity. A single metal table sat in the center of the room, surrounded by two chairs. One chair was occupied by Evelyn, who sat upright with her hands clasped tightly together, while another officer hovered nearby, jotting notes onto a clipboard. Her thoughts drifted back to the security checkpoint. The officer's behavior had shifted from professional curiosity to outright hostility, almost instantly. What had started as a request for clarification about harmless wires in her carry-on bag quickly spiraled into accusations and invasive searches. Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play here, something beyond mere protocol or misunderstanding. The officer who had escorted her to the holding room returned, now joined by a second man whose stern expression suggested he was in charge. He introduced himself as Agent Harris but offered no apology or explanation for why Evelyn was being detained. Instead, he launched straight into a barrage of questions, his tone clipped and accusatory. "Dr. Carter," he began, leaning against the wall with arms crossed, "you claim these items in your luggage are part of your work. Can you explain exactly what they're used for?" His voice carried a hint of skepticism, as if he already doubted her answer. Evelyn took a deep breath, steadying herself before responding. "Of course," she said evenly. "I'm an aerospace engineer specializing in defense technology. Those components are prototypes I use for testing new systems. They're completely harmless." Agent Harris raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Testing new systems? That sounds technical. Do you have documentation to prove this?" "Yes," Evelyn replied without hesitation. "All my projects are registered with the Department of Defense. If you need verification, I can provide contact information for my supervisors." She reached for her phone, eager to resolve the situation quickly, but Agent Harris stopped her with a sharp gesture. "No phones," he snapped. "Not until we've completed our investigation." Evelyn's frustration bubbled beneath the surface, but she forced herself to stay calm. Losing her temper wouldn't help, it might even make things worse. Instead, she focused on explaining her credentials in detail, hoping logic would prevail. She described her background, the years of service in the U.S. Army, her advanced degrees, and her current role working on cutting-edge technologies designed to protect national security. But none of it seemed to matter. Each piece of information she provided only prompted more questions, each one laced with doubt. At one point, Agent Harris asked sarcastically, "So you expect us to believe you're some kind of expert? That doesn't mean you couldn't be carrying something dangerous." The comment stung, not because it was unexpected, but because it underscored the absurdity of the situation. Here she was, a decorated veteran and respected scientist, being treated like a potential criminal simply because of the contents of her bag. And Evelyn couldn't ignore the uncomfortable truth. If she didn't look the way she did, perhaps this wouldn't have happened at all. Time dragged on as the interrogation continued. Evelyn noticed subtle changes in the officer's demeanor. While Agent Harris remained stoic and unyielding, the younger officer who had accompanied him seemed uneasy. He avoided making eye contact with Evelyn, occasionally glancing at his colleague as though questioning whether they were handling this correctly. At one point, Evelyn decided to shift tactics. Rather than answering their questions directly, she posed one of her own. "Can you tell me why I'm still here?" she asked, her voice steady but firm. "You've searched my belongings, verified my ID, and confirmed there's nothing illegal in my possession. Why am I being treated like a suspect?" Agent Harris hesitated, clearly caught off guard by her directness. For the first time since entering the room, he looked unsure of himself, but instead of offering an explanation, he deflected. "We're just doing our job, ma'am. Ensuring everyone's safety is our top priority." Evelyn resisted the urge to roll her eyes. Safety? Was that really the reason, or was it something else entirely? She thought about the countless times she'd encountered similar scenarios in her life. Store clerks following her through aisles, neighbors calling the police when she arrived home late at night, colleagues dismissing her ideas in meetings. These weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a much larger problem. Despite her growing anger, Evelyn knew losing control wouldn't solve anything. Instead, she resolved to remain composed, channeling her emotions into determination. If these officers refused to listen, to reason, she would find another way to prove her innocence and expose the injustice unfolding before her eyes. After what felt like hours, Agent Harris finally stood up, signaling the end of the interrogation. "We'll need to keep you here a little longer," he announced, his tone softer but still authoritative. "Just until we confirm everything checks out." Evelyn nodded, though her heart sank. She wanted nothing more than to leave the airport and put this nightmare behind her. But she also knew better than to argue. Instead, she used the moment to steel herself for whatever came next. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. As the officers exited the room, leaving her alone once again, Evelyn allowed herself a brief moment of vulnerability. She slumped forward, resting her elbows on the table and burying her face in her hands. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to let despair take hold. She reminded herself of who she was, a strong, capable woman who had faced far greater challenges than this. Whatever happened next, she would handle it with grace and resilience. Unbeknownst to Evelyn, word of her detention was already spreading. Passengers who had witnessed the incident at the security checkpoint had taken to social media, sharing videos and photos of the scene. Hashtags like "Justice for Evelyn" and "End Racial Profiling" began trending online, drawing attention from journalists and activists alike. Calls for accountability grew louder with each passing hour, putting pressure on airport authorities to address the situation. Meanwhile, Evelyn's legal team sprang into action. Friends and colleagues rallied around her, determined to ensure justice was served. Among them was Marcus Thompson, a close friend and fellow veteran who had worked alongside Evelyn during her military days. When he heard about her ordeal, he immediately contacted influential figures within the Pentagon, urging them to intervene. By the time Evelyn was finally released from the holding room, hours after her initial detention, the groundwork for change had already been laid. Her story had ignited a firestorm of outrage, sparking conversations about systemic racism and the urgent need for reform. Though the battle was far from over, Evelyn knew she wasn't fighting alone. Together, she and her supporters would turn this painful experience into a catalyst for meaningful progress. The holding room at JFK Airport felt smaller with each passing minute. Evelyn sat on the cold, hard chair, her fingers drumming lightly against the metal table in front of her. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow that seemed to amplify the tension in the air. Her thoughts raced as she replayed the events leading up to this moment. The invasive search, the relentless questioning, and the dismissive attitude of the officers who refused to believe her explanations. Despite her attempts to remain composed, frustration simmered beneath the surface. Every question they asked felt like another layer of insult added to injury. "Why are you treating me like I'm guilty?" she had asked earlier, only to be met with vague responses about procedure and safety protocols. But Evelyn knew better. She wasn't just being detained because of wires in her bag or because of some misplaced concern for national security. This was something else entirely. As the door creaked open once more, Agent Harris re-entered the room, followed by 2 additional officers. Their expressions were grim, and their body language suggested they were preparing for something significant. Evelyn's stomach tightened. Something about their demeanor told her this wasn't going to end quietly. "Dr. Carter," Agent Harris began, his tone colder than before. "We've reviewed your belongings, but we still have concerns." He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. "Given the nature of the items found in your possession, we're required to escalate this matter further." Evelyn blinked, incredulous. "Escalate? What does that even mean?" she demanded, her voice rising slightly despite her effort to stay calm. "You've already searched everything. There's nothing dangerous in my bag. It's all equipment related to my work. Equipment I've carried through airports countless times without issue." Agent Harris didn't respond directly. Instead, he gestured to one of the other officers, who stepped forward holding a pair of handcuffs. Evelyn froze, her heart pounding in her chest. For a split second, she thought she might be imagining things. Surely they wouldn't go this far. But then reality hit her like a freight train. "Wait," she said, standing abruptly. "What are you doing? You can't seriously think I'm a threat." Her voice trembled with a mix of fear and outrage. "I've done nothing wrong. I'm a U.S. Army veteran. I've dedicated my life to serving this country." Her protests fell on deaf ears. Without explanation, the officer moved toward her, gripping her wrist firmly and snapping the handcuffs into place. Evelyn flinched at the metallic click, a sound that echoed loudly in the confined space. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, not from pain, but from sheer humiliation. Here she was, a decorated soldier and scientist, being treated like a common criminal in front of strangers. The scene outside the holding room quickly drew attention. Passengers waiting nearby turned their heads, some gasping audibly while others pulled out their phones to record the spectacle. A crowd began to gather, murmuring among themselves as Evelyn was led away. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by shame and disbelief. One woman in the crowd called out, "What's going on? Why are they arresting her?" Another man chimed in, "She doesn't look like she's done anything wrong." The officers ignored them, pushing forward with grim determination. Evelyn wanted to scream, to tell everyone watching that this was a mistake, that she wasn't who they thought she was. But she bit her tongue, knowing it wouldn't do any good. They escorted her to a secure area deeper within the airport, a place reserved for serious incidents. The room was dimly lit, with concrete walls and a single barred window high above. It looked more like a jail cell than anything else. As they pushed her inside, Evelyn stumbled slightly, catching herself, on the edge of a bench bolted to the wall. The heavy metal door slammed shut behind her, leaving her alone in the suffocating silence. For several minutes, Evelyn sat motionless, trying to process what had just happened. Her mind flashed back to moments in her past when she'd faced discrimination, times when people judged her based on her skin color rather than her accomplishments. But this was different. This wasn't just bias, it was outright hostility disguised as protocol, and it hurt more than she cared to admit. Tears spilled down her cheeks now, quiet sobs shaking her shoulders as the weight of the situation crashed over her. She allowed herself this brief moment of vulnerability, knowing she needed to regain her strength soon. She couldn't let them break her. Not here, not now. Taking slow, deliberate breaths, she wiped her face with the sleeve of her blazer and straightened her posture. If they wanted to see her as strong and unshakable, then that's exactly how she would present herself. Hours passed, though it was impossible to tell time in the windowless room. Eventually, the door opened again, and Agent Harris entered, accompanied by a supervisor wearing a suit. His expression was less confrontational than before, almost apologetic. "Dr. Carter," he said, his voice softer, "we've contacted experts to verify the items in your luggage. They're reviewing everything now." Evelyn stared at him, her jaw tightening. "Experts? You mean bomb squad specialists?" She shot back, her tone laced with sarcasm. "Because that's what this feels like, an overreaction fueled by prejudice." The supervisor sighed, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, we understand this has been difficult for you, but we have procedures to follow, especially when dealing with potentially hazardous materials." "Potentially hazardous?" Evelyn snapped, leaning forward. "These aren't bombs, they're prototypes. Tools designed to improve technology, not harm people. And if you'd bothered to listen to me instead of jumping to conclusions, none of this would have happened." Her words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. The supervisor shifted uneasily, avoiding eye contact. After a long pause, he nodded. "We'll get this sorted out as quickly as possible. In the meantime, we appreciate your cooperation." Cooperation. The word stung. Evelyn hadn't resisted arrest or caused trouble. She'd cooperated fully, yet here she was, locked away like a criminal. Still, she held her tongue, knowing arguing further wouldn't help her case. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the verdict came. The so-called experts confirmed that Evelyn's belongings contained no illegal or dangerous items, just the harmless components she'd described all along. Reluctantly, the officers removed her handcuffs and informed her she was free to go. No apology accompanied the announcement, just a curt nod as they handed back her personal effects. Stepping out of the detention area, Evelyn blinked against the bright lights of the terminal. Cameras flashed as reporters and bystanders swarmed around her, shouting questions. "Dr. Carter, what happened? Do you feel targeted because of your race? Will you press charges?" Overwhelmed, Evelyn pushed through the crowd, clutching her belongings tightly. She spotted Marcus Thompson, her longtime friend and fellow veteran, waiting for her near the exit. Relief washed over her as she hurried toward him, throwing her arms around him in a tight embrace. "They treated me like a criminal," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Like I was someone else entirely." Marcus hugged her fiercely, his own anger simmering beneath the surface. "We'll make sure this doesn't happen again. Not to you, not to anyone else." As they walked away from the chaos of the airport, Evelyn made a silent vow. This incident wouldn't define her, but it would fuel her fight for justice. She would use her voice, her story, and her platform to shine a light on the systemic issues that had led to this moment. Because if they could do this to her, a respected scientist and military veteran, then no one was truly safe. Evelyn stepped into the cool night air outside JFK Airport, her legs still shaky from the ordeal she'd endured. The chaos of reporters and onlookers faded behind her as Marcus guided her toward his car, parked just a short distance away. Though physically free, Evelyn felt anything but liberated. Every glance from strangers, every flash of a camera, served as a reminder of the injustice she had faced. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her belongings, a laptop bag, her passport, and a jacket hastily thrown over her shoulder. Once inside the car, Evelyn leaned back against the seat, closing her eyes for a moment. She took slow, deep breaths, trying to steady herself. Marcus remained silent, giving her space to process everything that had happened. He knew better than to bombard her with questions or platitudes. Instead, he focused on driving them away from the airport, toward somewhere quieter where they could talk. As they merged onto the highway, Evelyn finally broke the silence. "I don't know what I did to deserve that," she said softly, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "They looked at me like I wasn't human, like I was some kind of threat just because of who I am." Marcus glanced at her briefly before returning, his attention to the road. "You didn't do anything wrong, Evie," he replied firmly. "This isn't about you. It's about them. About their biases, their fear, their refusal to see you for who you really are." Evelyn nodded, though her expression remained troubled. "I've dealt with racism my whole life," she admitted. "But this was different. It wasn't just ignorance, it was systemic. Like they had permission to treat me however they wanted because of some twisted idea of protocol." Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Marcus tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. As a fellow veteran, he understood all too well the frustrations of being judged not by your service but by the color of your skin. Still, hearing Evelyn recount her experience filled him with anger, not just for her sake but for everyone else who might find themselves in a similar situation. "Do you want to press charges?" Marcus asked after a pause. "We can make this public if you're ready. People need to know what happened tonight." Evelyn hesitated, weighing her options. On one hand, she longed to expose the injustice she'd suffered, to hold those responsible accountable for their actions. But, on the other hand, the thought of reliving the humiliation, of facing endless scrutiny and judgment made her stomach churn. She wasn't sure she had the energy for such a fight. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to let it go, to just move on and pretend it never happened. But another part knows I can't do that. If I stay silent, nothing will change, and I'm tired of staying silent." Marcus nodded, understanding her conflict. "Whatever you decide, I've got your back," he assured her. "But if you're thinking about taking action, there's someone we should call first." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, curiosity cutting through her fatigue. "Who?" "General Reynolds," Marcus replied. "He owes you a favor, or 10. Remember, that project you helped him salvage last year? The one no one else could fix?" Evelyn smiled faintly at the memory. General Reynolds had been skeptical at first, dismissing her ideas until desperation forced him to listen. By the time she finished, not only had the project succeeded, but it had also earned the Pentagon millions in savings. Since then, Reynolds had become one of her strongest advocates within the military establishment. "Do you think he'd actually help?" Evelyn asked, skepticism creeping into her tone. "This isn't exactly something the Pentagon deals with directly." "He'll help," Marcus said confidently. "Not just because he owes you, but because this reflects badly on the system he represents. Trust me, he won't take kindly to hearing that one of his top contractors was mistreated like this." After a brief debate, Evelyn agreed to reach out to General Reynolds. Marcus handed her his phone, knowing hers had been confiscated during her detention and returned only moments ago. With trembling fingers, Evelyn dialed the number, bracing herself for the conversation ahead. The call connected almost immediately. "Carter?" came General Reynolds' gruff voice. "What's going on? It's late." "Sir, I apologize for calling so late," Evelyn began, her voice wavering slightly. "But I need your help. Something happened to me tonight at JFK Airport, and I don't know what to do." Reynolds' tone shifted instantly, concern replacing irritation. "What happened, Carter? Are you okay?" Evelyn recounted the events of the evening, leaving out none of the details. The invasive searches, the accusations, the handcuffs, and the blatant disregard for her credentials. As she spoke, she could hear Reynolds growing angrier with each passing second. "That's unacceptable," he growled when she finished. "Absolutely unacceptable. Do you have any idea how much trouble these people are in right now?" "I just want justice, sir," Evelyn said quietly. "I don't care about revenge, I just want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." "You'll get both," Reynolds promised. "Leave this to me. I'll contact the appropriate channels immediately. By morning, they'll wish they'd never laid a finger on you." True to his word, General Reynolds wasted no time. Within hours, high-ranking officials at the Pentagon were alerted to Evelyn's case. Phone calls flew between departments, emails circulated among decision-makers, and urgent meetings were scheduled. By dawn, the story had reached the desks of senators, congressmen, and influential figures within the Department of Homeland Security. Meanwhile, Evelyn struggled to sleep. Despite her exhaustion, her mind refused to quiet down. Images of the airport replayed in her head. The cold stares, the handcuffs, the crowd watching her humiliation unfold. Each memory fueled her resolve to fight back, even as doubt lingered in the corners of her thoughts. The next morning, news outlets began picking up fragments of the story. Passengers who had witnessed the incident shared videos and photos online, sparking outrage across social media platforms. Hashtags like "Justice for Evelyn" and "End Racial Profiling" trended nationwide, drawing attention from activists, journalists, and everyday citizens alike. Calls for accountability grew louder, putting immense pressure on airport authorities to explain their actions. By midday, reporters were camped outside Evelyn's apartment building, eager to hear her side of the story. Friends and colleagues flooded her phone with messages of support, offering legal advice, connections to advocacy groups, and offers to speak publicly on her behalf. Even strangers reached out, sharing their own experiences of racial profiling and expressing solidarity with her cause. As the day wore on, Evelyn realized she couldn't ignore the growing momentum surrounding her case. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever been treated unfairly because of their race, gender, or background. If she stayed silent, she would be complicit in allowing the cycle of injustice to continue. That evening, Evelyn sat down with Marcus to draft a statement. Together they crafted a message that balanced her personal experience with a broader call for reform. It was concise yet powerful, highlighting the systemic issues at play while emphasizing the need for meaningful change. When the statement was complete, Evelyn posted it online, accompanied by a photo of herself standing tall despite the adversity she'd faced. Within minutes, the post went viral, garnering thousands of likes, shares, and comments. People praised her courage, thanked her for speaking out, and vowed to join the fight for justice. Among the flood of responses was a direct message from General Reynolds. "Well done, Carter," he wrote. "You're making waves already. Keep pushing. They're listening." Evelyn read the message with a mix of pride and determination. For the first time since the ordeal began, she felt a glimmer of hope. This wasn't just about holding individuals accountable. It was about dismantling the systems that allowed such injustices to occur in the first place. And if her voice could spark change, then she would use it to its fullest potential. With renewed purpose, Evelyn prepared for the battles ahead. She knew the road wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance, backlash, and moments of doubt. But she also knew she wasn't alone. Countless voices stood beside her, united in the pursuit of equality and fairness. Together, they would ensure that no one else had to endure what she had gone through at JFK Airport. The days following Evelyn's arrest at JFK Airport unfolded like a storm, chaotic, relentless, and impossible to ignore. Her statement, posted online after careful consideration with Marcus and trusted friends, had ignited a firestorm of public outrage. Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like "Justice for Evelyn" and "End Racial Profiling," while news outlets scrambled to cover the story from every angle. Reporters camped outside her apartment building, eager to capture even a glimpse of the woman whose ordeal had struck a chord across the nation. At first, Evelyn tried to stay out of the spotlight. She wasn't used to being the center of attention in such a personal way. Her work as an aerospace engineer often kept her behind the scenes, focusing on projects rather than people. But this time was different. This wasn't about technology or defense systems. It was about humanity. And Evelyn knew that if she wanted to effect real change, she couldn't shy away from sharing her truth. Her decision to hold a press conference came after much deliberation. Friends and advocates encouraged her to address the public directly, arguing that her voice could amplify the movement for justice. Reluctantly, Evelyn agreed, knowing it was the right thing to do, even though it terrified her. facing cameras, and microphones felt worlds apart from presenting research findings at conferences. This required vulnerability, courage, and a willingness to expose not just her experience, but also her pain. On the morning of the press conference, Evelyn dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that conveyed professionalism and strength. A crisp white blouse paired with tailored trousers gave her a polished appearance, while her signature blazer added a touch of authority. She styled her hair neatly and applied minimal makeup, wanting to look approachable yet confident. The goal wasn't to impress anyone. It was to remind the world that she was more than the victim they saw in viral videos. She was Dr. Evelyn Carter, scientist, veteran, advocate. Marcus accompanied her to the venue, a small community center near her home where local activists frequently gathered. Inside, rows of chairs were arranged before a makeshift stage adorned with a simple podium. Supporters filled the room, their faces reflecting a mix of anger, empathy, and determination. Among them were civil rights leaders, legal experts, and representatives from organizations fighting racial injustice. Cameras lined the walls, capturing every moment for broadcast later. As Evelyn stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to her, and for a brief second, she felt overwhelmed by the weight of expectation. Then she remembered why she was there, not for herself, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly because of their race, gender, or background. Taking a deep breath, she approached the podium and began to speak. "Thank you all for coming today," she started, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. "I never imagined I'd be standing here under these circumstances. What happened to me at JFK Airport should have been a routine security check, a minor inconvenience quickly resolved. Instead, it became something far more sinister. I paused, scanning the crowd. Some nodded in understanding, others clenched their fists in solidarity. Encouraged by their support, Evelyn continued. "I was detained, handcuffed, and treated like a criminal, all because of wires in my carry-on bag. Wires that are part of my work as an aerospace engineer, work that has earned me recognition and respect in my field. Yet none of that mattered when I stood in front of those officers. To them, I wasn't Dr. Evelyn Carter, decorated veteran and government contractor. I was simply a black woman traveling alone, and apparently that made me suspicious." Her words resonated deeply, drawing murmurs of agreement from the audience. Evelyn pressed on, her tone growing firmer. "This isn't just about me. It's about systemic racism embedded within institutions meant to protect us. It's about policies that allow bias to dictate how people are treated. It's about the countless individuals who face similar indignities daily, without the privilege of having their voices heard." Pausing again, Evelyn allowed her emotions to surface briefly. Her hands gripped the edges of the podium as she fought back tears. "I won't lie, I'm angry. Angry that I had to endure such humiliation. Angry that my identity was reduced to stereotypes. But most of all, I'm angry that we still live in a world where this kind of injustice is tolerated." The room erupted into applause, breaking the tension momentarily. Evelyn smiled faintly, grateful for the encouragement. She took another breath and shifted gears, turning her focus toward solutions. "Anger alone won't fix this problem," she said, her voice softening. "We need action. We need accountability. And most importantly, we need change." She outlined several steps she believed were necessary to address the issues exposed by her case. First, she called for increased transparency within airport security agencies, including mandatory body cameras for all personnel. Second, she advocated for comprehensive training programs aimed at eliminating implicit biases among law enforcement officers. Finally, she urged lawmakers to introduce legislation protecting travelers from racial profiling and ensuring fair treatment regardless of race, ethnicity, or nationality. By the time Evelyn finished speaking, the room was electric with energy. Journalists jotted down notes furiously, eager to share her message with the wider world. Activists exchanged ideas, brainstorming ways to support her cause. Even skeptics found themselves moved by her eloquence and conviction. As Evelyn stepped away from the podium, she was met with thunderous applause, a testament to the impact of her words. In the days that followed, Evelyn's press conference dominated headlines nationwide. Clips of her speech aired repeatedly on television, accompanied by commentary from experts and pundits alike. Many praised her poise and clarity, calling her a powerful voice for justice. Others highlighted the broader implications of her case, framing it as a wake-up call for society to confront its lingering prejudices. Social media played a crucial role in amplifying Evelyn's message. Influencers shared snippets of her speech, tagging lawmakers and urging them to take action. Memes and graphics featuring quotes from her statement circulated widely, spreading awareness far beyond traditional news channels. Online petitions demanding accountability for the officers involved garnered hundreds of thousands of signatures, putting further pressure on authorities to respond. Meanwhile, Evelyn received messages of support from unexpected places. Strangers sent heartfelt letters describing their own experiences with racial profiling, thanking her for giving them hope. Celebrities tweeted endorsements of her cause, using their platforms to amplify her voice. Even politicians weighed in, pledging to investigate the incident and push for reforms. Not everyone reacted positively, however. Critics accused Evelyn of exaggerating her ordeal or seeking attention. Some argued that airport security measures were justified, dismissing claims of bias as overblown. Trolls flooded her social media accounts with hateful comments, attempting to undermine her credibility. But Evelyn refused to let negativity deter her. With Marcus's help, she filtered out toxic interactions, focusing instead on constructive dialogue and meaningful engagement. Behind the scenes, Evelyn worked tirelessly to keep the momentum going. She collaborated with advocacy groups to organize rallies, town hall meetings, and educational workshops aimed at raising awareness about racial profiling. She participated in interviews with major news outlets, using each opportunity to emphasize the importance of systemic change. And she connected with other victims of discrimination, offering guidance and solidarity as they navigated their own struggles. Through it all, Evelyn remained grounded, leaning on her faith, family, and friends for strength. Though the journey was emotionally draining, she drew inspiration from the countless individuals joining her fight. Together, they formed a coalition united by a shared vision, a future free from prejudice and fear. As weeks turned into months, Evelyn's efforts began bearing fruit. Lawmakers introduced bills targeting racial profiling in transportation security, citing her case as evidence of the urgent need for reform. Investigations into the practices of TSA officers revealed troubling patterns of discriminatory behavior, prompting calls for sweeping changes within the agency. Training programs designed to combat implicit biases gained traction, attracting funding and support from influential organizations. Though challenges remained, Evelyn felt a sense of progress, taking root. Her ordeal had transformed into a catalyst for change, a painful yet powerful reminder of the resilience required to dismantle systemic injustice. And as she looked ahead to the battles still looming on the horizon, Evelyn knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't stop fighting until equality became a reality for all.